everyone, and thanks for joining us in another episode of Building Family Resiliency, Community Voices, Community Perspectives. My name is Deb Ottman, and I am the host for this podcast series. And today I am absolutely delighted to have two community voices joining me as guests. Our guests today are Julie Lee Yang and Bao Vang, and both of them will be offering us some perspective and insights into their experiences as advocates and professionals working on behalf of the Hmong community. So welcome, ladies. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Just to give you a quick background of our guests, Bao is a busy lady. She is a child protection worker. She is also a volunteer for the Hmong Early Childhood Coalition, or HECC, as it's known. She does a number of different things on behalf of that job. She works as a trainer, offering insight into child development and trauma, cultural diversity, and school readiness. She does a lot of outreach on early childhood care and works with providers, both families and family friend and neighbor care. And in addition to all of that, she's also the parent to 4 children, teens and adults. So she's bringing a lot of wonderful lenses and perspective today to the conversation, as does Julie. She too is an extremely busy professional. Julie is a Lund Fellow here at the Institute on Community Integration. She is a graduate student in public health, and she right now has a particular focus on looking at autism within the public health sector. Julie is the parent of 3 children, and her children have different developmental profiles, which too influences and offers just a variety of perspectives on our conversation today. So I'm just really humbled and so grateful that the two of you are here. So thank you. So I'm just going to start by asking both of you, and feel free to speak to this question from whatever perspective you would like to, whether it's in your roles as community advocates, whether it's in your role professionally within the public health sector or child protection, or if it's in your role as mothers. They're all equally valuable. But I'm curious to know, in your words, how do you view resiliency? What does it mean to you? And in addition to that, what brought you to the definition? Julie, let's start with you.
Okay. To me, resiliency means facing life's challenges, pursuing meaning, and finding joy. As a parent, resiliency is an ongoing process, especially during this enduring pandemic. What brought me to this definition was having to face my own fears as an individual and as a parent to 3 young autistic children, and moving past any preconceived notions of disability. That also meant doing the work and self-reflection of my upbringing, which means that I don't subscribe to any of the stigma, discrimination, shame, or oppression that persists in the patriarchal Hmong society, specifically adverse impact on the disability, LGBTQ communities, and the rights of women and children.
Wow, that is a lot to unpack. I'm curious, as I listen to you share these different thoughts and the different things that this all raises for you, is as you consider the influence of culture and in your own parenting with respect to being resilient, because you certainly are walking, talking advertisement for that, with such little people having particular needs and pursuing your studies. I'm curious how you've negotiated and navigated the tension between not throwing out all the things that your culture has brought to you, but recognizing there are things that maybe have limited, it sounds to me, or maybe that you have found not helpful in maintaining your resilience. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. Growing up in a large Hmong family, my father was a very active community member and leader within the Vang clan.
Okay.
So that also meant that it was a very patriarchal culture that we practiced growing up. And growing up as a daughter, I think you just accept your role as a daughter and the expectations they have of you as you become an adult, and that you should just
Mm-hmm.
follow the expectations of tradition, of participating in things that could be actually damaging to yourself, to other women, to daughters, to your parents, both, but especially your mom and all of those things. And once I had children, and then I discovered that they have specific needs each individually based on
Mm-hmm.
their autistic needs.
Mm-hmm.
I had to just face, what are my fears as a parent? I realized, okay, well, things aren't going to be what I thought was going to be my ideals of raising a family and doing those kinds of things. And then when you name your fears and you face them and you go, where are they coming from? It comes from, you know, your upbringing and the stigma and the shame that can come with being different or having different specific needs. It all just kind of came together, and I realized, oh, you can't participate in that. You can't subscribe to that behavior if you want to change and you want better for your children, and if you want to be a better parent for your children. And they're all tied together, but like a really simple example is in a lot of families with autistic children, we can't even say the word autism. Don't even acknowledge that your child is autistic, because the fear and the stigma of being shamed by other families or other members of the clan can make it really difficult for children to receive the early intervention services that they could benefit from. And so I think speaking out about it and being open about it as a parent, I can hopefully offer the voice and support to others that are in need of support, of being able to be heard, being able to seek out that help that they need for their children, instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to follow what my family suggests or what my clan thinks and just accept your child's needs and
Mm.
focus on helping them have a better quality life.
Sure. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. There's some really powerful lessons in there for we as the helpers and the service providers and all of that, as well as some very just profound things for us to think about as fellow human beings and community members. I appreciate that. Bao, I don't want to leave you out of this early part of the conversation. From your perspectives, what does resiliency mean to you? And do you have anything in your personal journey that brought you to the definition that you currently regard?
Yeah, I just first want to applaud Julie for all of the great things that she has done to on a personal and professional level. I think that she is a great example of what resiliency is. To me, I think, it's the ability to bounce back after a crisis. It's finding courage and independence through our life experiences or professional experiences, and just being able to bring positivity out of that. I think that everybody has their own different walk of life. And my reason to really, coming and pinpointing to kind of what it means to me is, again, those life and experiences professionally and personally. I don't know if I can really say like I'm kind of first generation. I wasn't born here in the US. I came here when I was 5. And I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, And so I think, at that time it was figuring out my identity, figuring out who I was in the midst of this culture shock, right? And not really
Mhm.
feeling like I could fit in, but trying to fit in, not wanting to accept who I was because I was different than everybody else around me. And so I think through that experience and then really finding my culture, really finding what was important to me, and again, finding my courage and independence through that, finding my voice through that. And then I became a mom at a really young age. I was 18 when I had my first daughter, and I was pregnant in my first year of college. Walking through that, and having to experience trying to balance being a new mom while balancing school, while balancing being a daughter-in-law, being a wife, and figuring out what resiliency meant to me at that time, and learning how to balance all of that along with kind of the expectations of what each role had to bring me to. Julie spoke a little bit about, just the patriarchal society that we live in, or just our culture. And so for me, it was, again, being a young daughter-in-law who, because when you're a daughter-in-law, there's a lot of expectations set forth for you, right? You got to know how to cook and clean and, serve, and then, you're trying to do all of that in the midst of, trying to be a student and trying to be, a parent to your own child, and then trying to learn yourself, trying to figure out, what your passion is, what your strengths are, what you're good at. And I knew very, very early on that I had wanted education to be some part of my career. And, my parents, they play a really big role in this meaning of resiliency for me too, because, my dad was the oldest of his siblings, and, he didn't get that education piece. And so he had three older daughters. And again, Julie really talked about, kind of being a daughter and learning how to balance that. I was very fortunate enough that, my parents really supported all of their children, daughters and sons the same, especially when it came to education, and they really instilled, like, if you want to achieve the American dream, you have to go to school. And, so I knew very early on that education was going to be, was going to play a role in my life. And so, and then I was a preschool teacher for a really long time, and working with families who were dealing with poverty, who were dealing with, struggling to meet basic needs. And so, seeing kind of how they're striving and how they're building resiliency or breaking resiliency because of the lack of needs, or, having to deal with all the systemic barriers that have been put forth in front of them. And, and then which really led me to kind of where I am today, in
Mhm.
both positions, with HECC and in my current position with CPS, that, you get to see families right at their weakest points. And so you get to see, where families can build resiliency, or you get to be able to be that voice for them, to tell them this is your resiliency, this is your strength, and to really talk about their strengths. Because when they're in
Mhm.
their modes of crisis, they forget what their strengths are. They forget to um, really kind of look at themselves and say, this is who I am, this is what I can do, because they're in survival mode, a lot of the times. So it's, whether it's the families, in one job or the other, I think that they're all struggling and fighting to just stay afloat. A lot of the times, the families that I have currently come into contact with, I think resiliency again is being able to bounce back from that. And
Yeah.
so I definitely take it to heart. There's a lot of, personal experiences that just myself, again, all of the struggles and all of the stuff that I've, have gone through as, a young mom and as a young wife, and having to, build this future of where we are at now, just really have
Mhm.
led to that meaning for me.
Wow. Again, so much to unpack here and to talk about. Thank you, Bao. What I'm really struck by as I listen to both of you is, as you talk about resilience, both of you have identified something, maybe not in these terms, but it's not just resilience for both of you. It sounds to me as if it hasn't been just the ability to bounce back from challenges or hardships or things you're trying to navigate, but in both of your stories and paths, I'm also hearing that you were able to grow from and bounce forward from these life experiences. And so that is something that I'm very much struck by. The other thing that I'm struck by with both of you is it sounds like there are definitely expectations based on your gender for your role that you know came to. There are certain expectations involved with how one is meant to be within a family system with respect to serving and being a caregiver, to being a mother, and doing the raising of children, and which brings both, I think, riches in terms of having family, that family system, but it also sounds as if it can also create some tension. I've heard that in both of your stories. And the way that you both have been able to really gracefully navigate, not maybe always easily, but finding your way in again, helping you bounce forward or to grow from all of that. One of the things that I'd like to focus on, and Bao, you brought this up, and it leads me to my next question. You both have such rich experiences and are so knowledgeable in a lot of different areas that feed into early childhood, whether it's through development, the quality of a child's caregiving environment, how safe they are within that environment, both physically and with their relationships, with education, early education. And so you bring so many pieces of knowledge to this. But my question is, as you think about the past going on 2 years now and the challenges that the Hmong community has faced, both with respect to maintaining and honoring the cultural piece of being Hmong in a place that is bounded by majority culture norms and systems. And that in and of itself, as you know better than I, are difficult things to navigate. But then we put COVID on top of it. And it's thrown so many things. I don't have to enumerate all the ways in which COVID has impacted our families. I'm curious to know, I want to revisit this idea about crisis making us forget our strengths. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen that happen either during COVID or within your, from your professional perspectives? Well, let's start with you because you were the one that articulated that. And we know from neurobiology that's absolutely, that's not just a perception, that's science, that we can't access our thinking brain when we're in fight or flight mode. How is it that you've seen this happen, and what are the things that you're noticing has impacted your community when you regard this question?
Yeah, I think that this is a very important question because, it really brings us the opportunity to talk about all of the things that happened during the pandemic, and it was during a time of Asian hate as well. So it brought up a lot of, especially for our older generation in our communities, right? We talked about during that period of time, of the resiliency that they had to find when they came to a new country, right? Feeling like they're in this new space, and this is in this new country, and really trying to figure out how to build up their resiliency from there. But I think that the Asian hate crimes and the incidences that were happening during the pandemic early on,
Mhm.
it really brought back that trauma for a lot of our families. It really brought back the fear in not being able to step outside their homes, not being able to go to the grocery store, not being able to take a walk around the block without feeling like they
Yeah.
had to look over their shoulders.
Wow.
A lot of our older generations, they're refugees, and so they're fleeing from war, and it's bringing them back to those days that they had to flee in the woods and had to hide, and so they're forgetting in that period of time, when we talked about earlier of people forgetting their strengths during times of crisis. They're in such flight or fight mode that you have stated, that they're forgetting that I'm here because I have a right to be here. I'm here because I have,
Mhm.
gone through all of these things in order to be here. I have, you know, stood with the US. I have been a part of this war. I have, earned my right. I work, I'm a citizen of this country. And they forget all of that,
Mhm.
right? Because they're stuck kind of in this fear mode of what's going to happen to me because I'm the target of these attacks right now, or
Yeah.
I look like the target of these attacks right now. So, I think that topic was a very important one for our community, but it also brought our community together. In the sense
Okay.
that we have to stand together, we have to protect each other, we have to be one another's voices, we have to look out for each other, and we have
Mhm.
to bring it forward, um, and make sure that others are aware of how we are feeling, that others are aware that we are also struggling. I'm just speaking for myself, but it also came during a time of the George Floyd incident, and a lot of the um, racial disparities and inequities that were going on during that time too. And it really brought forward kind of conversations that should be happening, right? Whether it's
Yes.
in the
Yes.
schools, at work, at a professional level. I think people were hiding these conversations, or hiding behind certain things for so long, that these instances, even though unfortunate, really brought forward these conversations to light. And I think that during that period of time, because there was the George Floyd stuff going on, and then there was the Asian hate crimes going on, I think that a lot of some of the members of our community, there was some tension there, between the two
Mhm.
communities, feeling like, we, um, our trauma is not being, or our experiences are being forgotten, or you've heard the
Mhm.
Asian people, or the model minorities, and such. And so I think
Right.
we, as a community, we're fighting to get our voice heard too, that we are also dealing with these disparities, and we are also
Mhm.
dealing with these struggles as well, and figuring out our voice. But then, in all that, how do we support our Black and African American communities while we have our
Right.
own voice as well, and support our community at the same time? So I think that was a
Yeah.
really difficult time for a lot of people. And then, in regards to our providers, our culture is, we love to gather, being together as a family,
Yes.
eating together at the table. That's part of our culture. That's how we relate, and that's how we show each other love and care. And we weren't able to do that during the pandemic.
Sure.
So there was a lot of feeling of isolation. I know that for our providers, they were very, very isolated. They're already isolated in the sense that, they are a small group among providers, right? But
Mhm.
not being able to have in-person trainings where they can see their friends, and where they can talk about, oh, are you experiencing A, B, and C? And if you did, how did you deal with it? They weren't,
Mhm.
able to do that. There were not other organizations that were really supporting them, that had maybe been there before, but we're no longer providing that in-person service or support to them. Heck, we are fortunate enough that we got this grant, and we were able to go and see our providers in person. And we were able to start then providing trainings in person. And it really, we didn't know how isolated they felt until we had these trainings and they came, and they really then really poured out their voices of, this is how lost we were during the pandemic, and just very grateful that they were provided a space to come together. I would say, again, just definitely our community was feeling isolated. There are a lot of cultural changes that had to happen related to like funeral practices, and having to do that differently, versus being able to go to one another's homes and help each other grieve and help support families. We weren't able to
Mm-hmm.
do that because of the pandemic. Funerals were cut really short
Mm-hmm.
because of expectations from CDC and the state and government and all of that. So I think that just added to the feelings of
Yeah.
isolations as well.
Well, thank you. That's you've covered so many important issues, and I'd like to revisit some of them. And before you do, I would like to hear, Julie, what do you think about as you think about the last 2 years and this notion that the pandemic itself may have simply exacerbated or amplified challenges and barriers that were already being experienced within your community. And, how have you seen that played out? Do you have anything you want to share to what Bao's already said?
Well, I think for families with children with disabilities or special needs, I think the shortage of inclusive and culturally diverse childcare providers, direct support
Yes.
workers,
Yes.
paraprofessionals in special education, intervention services such as speech and occupational therapies, all of those were directly impacting a caregiver's ability to be resilient.
Yes.
Yeah, before the pandemic, it was already hard for families to find
Mm-hmm.
inclusive and culturally diverse childcare providers that were affordable
Mm-hmm.
and quality.
Yes.
And then the pandemic came and it has just wiped so many workers from being able to work and um, having to become at-home providers all over again, and kind of taking that
Right.
back and saying, we're going back in time to now provide for our children. Virtual learning has been a challenge for families, and especially for children with special needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Many kids don't do well with virtual learning, and especially the little kiddos. And that's been even a challenge on a personal level for my family, having all small kids in need of early intervention services, and everything being disrupted. Those services are no longer being provided at the time most critical for them, and it's now
Right.
delayed. And so that's going to have a long-term impact on their development. So
Yeah, I think too frequently it's easy to forget that when we're thinking about these early years, a month can be profound, much less when you hear about wait lists that are 8 months, 9 months.
mhm.
That's so significant in the life of a child that may be developing typically. But when you think of a child that isn't showing typical development and requires that additional intervention, it becomes even more profound. And you're right. Just the lack of socialization. I think about with respect to family and community rituals and gathering. We know that just coming together, regardless of the culture we're talking about, is so profoundly basic to human experience, right? Coming together in community. And when we consider the impact that that has on a child, we can't isolate one developmental domain from another. I think about the impact that it has on our little ones, especially those, as you shared, Julie, the those children that require the additional services and support. So I'm so mindful of our time, and there's so much I want to talk about. But since we are looking at the impact all of this is having on our little people, as well as their families and caregivers, as we look ahead to moving out of this pandemic phase, and hopefully, and entering this into kind of being the new normal, as you consider the world, the community, things in which you do to support your community, what are the things that you think about, both in terms of being hopeful for, or the things that you hold concerns about, as you think about walking alongside families and helping them access and understand services, or even just something as basic as education, early education and early care? Do either of you have ideas or thoughts that you want to share?
Well, I just wanted to, really bring up as we talk about resiliency, kind of the importance of mental health and all of this too, that when we are
Yes.
struggling with our mental health, that it's really hard, again, to really see how we can get out of that. And in kind of my lowest points, right, I always think, okay, I have a choice. I have a choice to either get back up and keep moving, or have a choice to stay in this dark place, right? And I might have the ability to have, because of my experiences, and to be able to build that resiliency up to a level where I can make a decision to come out of that dark place. Not everybody has the ability to do that. I think about having a space for people to be able to process. We talk a lot earlier about the isolation that people have felt during this time, and not just the parents but the children, the isolation that kids feel when they can't socialize, when all of that is being lost to them, at every single stage, developmental stage, right? At the very young stages, when they really need to learn how to socialize, at the teenage, and a young adults, where they need that socialization in order to thrive, or in order to build their strengths. And
Right.
so being allowed a space, I think, for our people, for our parents, for our children, for them to take a pause and just really process what they're feeling, to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that their voice is being heard.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, when we talk about, again, mental health, that's a whole different conversation when it's related to our community too, and understanding what is mental health, and understanding too that how does resiliency get built into the mental health piece.
Yeah.
And I think, again, if they have that space, to be able to really process truly what is going on, having their voices at the table would be supportive for them. I think is going to be valuable, because we are not every family's voice, so it's important to have them at the table. I think that if organizations that have the capability to be able to provide families with resources and with that space, I think that they should be able to do that, and should do that.
Yeah. So I'm struck by this notion of providing space. We talk about providing space, giving permission to pause and digest. But it can be taken all the way to, physical space. So as you consider this, what does providing space look like with respect to supporting families, or within the provision of services? Is there something that you might change or fold into the current supports or services that you see that are available?
Um, and Julie, you can definitely feel free to add into this too. I think that if I think about it from a provider standpoint, from that lens, I think that they What we have been able to try with them is just creating a space for community conversations, right? For them to come and say, hey,
Okay.
this is what I'm really struggling with. And, if we can do that safely in person, I think that that's what they would prefer, because when they are in their home all day long and they're expected to be these different types of roles, they
Mm-hmm.
are not allowed that space to take a pause. So I think if we can do that, that physical space, and then just that space for their voice to be heard, I think HEC has tried that a couple times. We found that that has been, very helpful with
Okay.
our providers that we have served, as well as we've had parent conversations as well about, the struggles. And I think it just feels good to
Mm-hmm.
be able to talk about what you're feeling, right? Versus
Mm-hmm.
holding it all in all the time
Yeah.
and just being expected to be strong or be
Right.
resilient or just take it in. So,
Yeah. We name it to tame it, right?
yeah.
We identify those feelings so that we can cope with them and address them. Yeah. So, Julie, do you have any other thoughts about the concerns or the hopes that you have going forward? And as Bao has shared, do you have other ideas about how we might change our own approaches to supporting the community?
Yeah, speaking from a professional and a personal level, I think we need to be flexible and
Ah,
forgiving of the pursuit of, you know, things that can't be achieved while we're in this pandemic. And just as a provider, I think we can offer tools and resources that can help families adapt to ongoing changes. But most of all, if we just validate their challenges and their journey
yeah.
and listen to them and just say, have compassion for yourself. Try to recharge. Recharge by seeking an activity that brings you joy just for the pleasure of joy, not because you need to achieve something. Just find
Mm-hmm.
that little bit of time at least once a week for your own personal recharge. And then that will reflect and model healthy behaviors for your families and your children. And
Mm-hmm.
I think also, as a provider, I think if we continue the work to advocate for families, for policy changes, and things that support families, especially during this pandemic, we've realized the shortage of healthcare workers and paraprofessionals. And I think if we can show that we need to foster the shortage of care workers by improving training, improving pay,
Yes.
improving
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
how we value their roles as essential care
Mm-hmm.
workers for the disability community, it will better
Yes.
reflect how we treat the disability community as a whole. Yeah, when we don't value care workers or childcare providers or paraprofessionals or any of those that are essential workers, we're saying to the disability community that you don't matter and we
Mm-hmm.
don't respect and value you as a person in the space, and we need to change that and have that
Mm-hmm.
conversation. Building an inclusive environment where are improving health outcomes for children and people with disabilities and people with autism, things like that, because we're shaping the environment to be inclusive. We're not telling young people with different abilities that, oh, you have to mold into society and suppress who you are or your identity. I think we should focus on making the environment more inclusive. And that can start with advocacy, that can start with our own way we model to our families, our children, to the people we provide services for. And one thing I would wish for parents and families to know is initiating early intervention as early as possible is the best approach, because often families are put on wait lists, like you talked about earlier. And the more with this pandemic, it's delaying that
Mm-hmm.
early intervention. And to understand why early intervention is important, not only because of this waitlist issue also, but because something that I read in an article about early autism intervention, for example, something that was published in 2018 by Fletcher Watson, was that the concept of brain plasticity isn't really about capacity to change, but more about the capacity to learn. And I think that's important because parents might not understand or might misunderstand how early intervention services can or can, what they can and cannot achieve. And I like to think of it as increasing their capacity to learn, the children that benefit from these services, and helping parents learn how to support the way your children will learn, which might be different. I would like parents to just focus on the framework of inclusion and neurodiversity, meaning we are supporting a child's natural abilities and passions and not suppressing their identity or their ability to be authentic and live authentically.
Right.
I think for Hmong parents, one thing I would say is just if you can do one thing, just practice unconditional love for your children with no expectation of anything in return. And
I love that.
yeah.
Yeah. We
Well
just love
said,
these little
Julie.
people for who they are, right? As they come to us. I so appreciate everything you both have shared. And I don't know that there's much else that, like I said, there's so many other things we could talk about, and you both have done such a lovely job of sharing what you feel we as providers may be able to communicate to families. And you've begun to talk a little bit about how providers might change in the way that they speak and what they communicate to families. Is there anything else that you feel is really important for providers to know, and how they might shift their practice in order to not only support the resiliency of families, and particularly, I recognize fully you're not speaking for the entire Hmong community, you're only speaking from your own perspectives and experiences. But as you think about it from a cultural lens, what might providers do to better support families, especially when it comes to encouraging them to put maybe some of those cultural fears or some of the considerations of feeling shame over suspecting that there may be something going on with their child? How do you encourage, or what would you suggest to providers? What might they do to kind of shift that feeling and to invite families to consider putting aside those cultural prohibitions in favor of supporting their little people?
I think from my viewpoint, if it's for professionals who are not from the Hmong community, I think that it's very important to educate yourself about the culture, to know
Yes.
how you can support this family from a cultural lens. Not a cultural lens because you know what you know, or you think you know the culture, but a cultural lens from the family's point of view, because they can only speak to this story. No professional
Mm-hmm.
or no provider can speak to another person or another family story. And so it's important to ask them what their story is, and to know their story, and to know what they feel they need support in and what they feel they need help in. Julie mentioned earlier that, the thought of, or just the knowledge of supporting disabilities or children with disabilities is not something that is, um, it's something new to our community, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, even when we translate it into words, we have very limited words and how we can translate. We don't have
Such a
uh,
good reminder.
yeah, we don't have a word for autism. We don't have a word for developmentally delayed. We don't have words to interpret, or to that those translate to. So we have to kind of like go through this whole explanation of
Yeah.
this is what this looks like, you know? So I think that education is going to be very important. I think that if providers have the education that they could provide to families to be able to have
Mm-hmm.
that knowledge to, you know, see their child from a different lens, right? That and you know, Julie can definitely speak to this better than I can, you know, that your child is not incapable just because they're not incapable
Correct.
of socializing, they're not incapable of doing this task, or they're not incapable of having a future just because of
Mm-hmm.
this disability. And so really educating our families, our parents, and really bring forth more information to our community as well, so that larger organizations who have that capacity to do a larger outreach or to touch more Hmong families, that they are then also holding that accountability or that responsibility as
Yeah.
well to educate our families, and how we can all really bring that back to resiliency, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
we you know, this family story or this family's um upbringing, you know, has really led to where we are right now.
Mm-hmm. That's those, there's such nuggets of wisdom there. Thank you, Bao. Julie, is there anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, I loved everything that Bao said. And I think providers, again, emphasizing that you are aware of your biases, aware of
Mm-hmm.
your own beliefs and your own, your own lack of knowledge, and educating yourself and then asking questions. There's no
Yes.
shame of just asking questions or saying, I don't know what
Yeah.
I can do to help you. What would you like me to do? Or what can I do to support you? What do you need? Because usually people know what they need. They don't know how to ask for help, or they don't know that there's a
Right.
service or a resource out there that's available. So any kind of provider can say, if I don't know, I'll look for you, or I'll connect you with an organization such as
Yeah.
Hmong Early Childhood Coalition that can provide those resources to help
Yeah.
find what it is that this family needs to support them
Yeah.
in building that resilience.
Well, I think that really gets to, just for me, the most profound and central point of this. It's building that trust, building that relationship through being openly curious, being openly accepting, non-judgmental, and taking it on for ourselves to learn about each individual's story. I think that is just, there's really not much to add beyond that, is there? And so thank you both sincerely from the bottom of my heart. This has been such a rich conversation, far too short, but I appreciate you both for everything that you are doing on behalf of our little ones, and just on behalf of helping to give us new things to consider as we all try to continue to go on and do better. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.